I want you to picture a dining room table, Thanksgiving, 12 people seated, a turkey in the middle, and one man. The patriarch, the one who gets to sit at the head, deciding that this is the moment, the one he's apparently been saving up for, to turn to the woman his son brought home and tell her, in front of everyone, that she'll never amount to anything. Not in a whisper. Not in a private corner of the kitchen. At the table. Out loud. With his whole family watching to see what she'll do. She didn't do anything. Not that night. That's the part people always misunderstand. They hear a story like this and they want the comeback to happen right there, right then, silverware slamming, chair scraping, someone storming out into the November cold. That's not how this one goes. This one goes slow. And the slower it goes, the better it gets. My name doesn't matter. What matters is who said those words, why he thought he could, and what he never accounted for when he said them. Welcome back to Blood and Backbone, where we talk about the moments families don't put in the holiday newsletter. If you're new here, these stories are dramatized for entertainment, but the kind of humiliation you're about to hear, that part is real for a lot of people. If it's real for you too, you're in the right place. Let's get into it. Let's call her Vivian. 29 years old when this story begins, a commercial real estate analyst who had spent the better part of 3 years quietly building a career in an industry that did not make things easy for people who looked like her or came from where she came from. She was not loud about her ambitions. She was not the type to walk into a room announcing what she intended to accomplish. She just worked, steadily and without a lot of ceremony, the way people do when they've learned early that no one is going to hand them anything and the only thing to do about that is decide not to need anyone to. The man she was dating was named Marcus. He came from a different kind of family. Not wealthy exactly, but comfortable in the particular way of people who have been comfortable long enough that they've stopped noticing it. His father, a man named Gerald, had spent 30 years in insurance, built a modest but stable empire out of a regional brokerage, and developed along the way an extremely confident set of opinions about what kind of people were worth something and what kind of people were not. Gerald's opinions, as it turned out, correlated very reliably with whether or not a person had a family name he recognized, a job title he considered serious, and a manner he described as substance. Vivian, in his assessment, had none of these things. She was too quiet at dinners. She didn't laugh at his jokes with enough enthusiasm. She'd grown up in a part of the city Gerald wouldn't drive through and attended a state school Gerald would not have sent his son to. He had made his discomfort with Vivian known from the beginning, in the way people like Gerald usually do, not directly, not honestly, but through the accumulation of small comments that each carried plausible deniability on their own. He'd ask Marcus, within Vivian's earshot, whether he was sure he wanted to settle down so early. He'd introduce her at family gatherings by her first name only, where everyone else's partner got a full introduction with job title and context. He'd ask her questions about her work in a tone that made the questions sound like tests she was failing in real time. Vivian noticed all of it. She said nothing. Marcus noticed some of it. He said, privately, that his father just needed time, that Gerald was old-fashioned but not malicious, that it would smooth out once the family saw how serious things were getting. Vivian did not argue with him. She had learned a long time ago that there were some things you could not tell people about someone they loved. Not because the things weren't true, but because the person needed to arrive at the truth themselves before they'd be able to hold it. She was patient. She was strategic about her patience, the way a good analyst is strategic, which is to say she was collecting information and keeping her options organized and not making any permanent decisions until she knew exactly what she was working with. The Thanksgiving in question was their third together. Vivian had been with Marcus for 2.5 years. She had, by this point, made partner track at her firm, was managing accounts that would have meant something significant to Gerald if he'd bothered to find out what they were, and had quietly been put forward as a candidate to lead a major acquisition project her company had been positioning for over the better part of a year. None of this had come up at dinner, because Vivian didn't volunteer information about her professional life to people who'd already decided it didn't count. The comment came after the main course, during the kind of table lull that fills up with bad decisions. Gerald had been on his third glass of wine. Someone, Marcus's younger brother, had made an offhand remark about Vivian's firm doing well in the current market, something he'd read somewhere. And Gerald, As if he'd been waiting for exactly this opening, said it. Not to Marcus. To Vivian, directly, for the first time in 3 years, with full eye contact and a smile that wasn't a smile. No offense to you personally, but I want my son with someone who's built something real. You're a smart enough girl, I'm sure you work hard, but at your level, in that kind of work, you're essentially support staff. And I think Marcus deserves someone with a little more substance behind her. Something that'll still be standing when the market turns. The table went quiet. Someone put down a fork. Vivian looked at Gerald for a long moment. Then she picked up her wine glass, took a sip, and said, pleasantly and without any particular heat, I appreciate you sharing that. And then she turned to Marcus's mother and asked a question about a recipe, and the dinner moved on. Later, in the car, Marcus was angry in the apologetic, ineffective way of someone who has not yet decided whether his anger is going to cost him anything. He told her his father was out of line. He told her it wouldn't happen again. He asked her if she was okay. She told him she was fine. She was fine. She had, in fact, been fine since approximately 90 seconds into Gerald's little speech, because in those 90 seconds she had made a very clear-eyed decision about something she'd been turning over for a while, and once she made it, she felt considerably lighter. The decision was this. She was done softening her professional life to make Gerald comfortable. She was done editing herself at dinners, done responding to his tests with gracious deflection, done waiting for a man who had told her exactly who he was 3 Thanksgivings in a row to somehow become someone different. She wasn't going to fight him. She wasn't going to leave Marcus over it. Not yet. She was simply going to stop performing smallness for someone who had never once bothered to look at what was actually there. The acquisition project Vivian had been put forward for was a significant commercial property deal. A mid-sized portfolio in a market her firm had been quietly positioned to move in for about 2 years. The negotiating process had been careful and slow, the way these things usually are when there's a lot of money and several competing interests involved. What none of the other parties had known, until they didn't, was that Vivian had identified a structural issue in the way the competing bid had been assembled. A technicality around a covenant on one of the anchor properties that technically made the rival offer non-compliant under the existing zoning agreement. She had flagged it 8 months earlier. In a memo her senior partners had read carefully and then held quietly while the process played out. When the competing bid formally advanced and the other party's attorneys discovered the problem themselves, there was a moment of real chaos in the negotiations, and in that moment, Vivian's firm moved. The deal closed 4 months after that Thanksgiving dinner. Vivian's name was on it. Her bonus that year was more than Gerald's entire brokerage had earned in any single quarter of his career. She didn't announce this to the family. She didn't call Gerald. She didn't arrange a dinner specifically to present the information. She simply showed up at the next family gathering, Easter, 7 months after Thanksgiving, and was herself. Fully, without adjustment. She answered questions about her work accurately rather than carefully. She didn't soften the numbers when they came up in conversation. She didn't ask for Gerald's approval, didn't angle for his validation, didn't do anything at all to signal that his opinion of her value was something she was still tracking. What she couldn't have engineered, and didn't have to, was that Marcus's brother had done his own research in the months between Thanksgiving and Easter. Because he worked in finance adjacent to her industry and the deal she'd closed had been discussed professionally in rooms he was sometimes in. He'd mentioned it to Marcus. Marcus had done his own reading. And by the time Easter arrived, the family's understanding of who Vivian actually was had shifted in a way that had nothing to do with Vivian having to say a single word about it. Gerald was quieter at that Easter dinner. Not apologetic, not warm. Gerald was not built for that. But quieter in the specific way of a man who has recently discovered that the person he dismissed had not, in fact, required his approval to become something consequential. The conversation that mattered came later, in the kitchen, while Vivian was helping clear dishes. Gerald came in and stood near the counter and was quiet for a moment, and then said something that landed somewhere in the space between an apology and an explanation and missed both marks by a wide distance. He said he supposed she'd done well for herself. That the deal he'd been hearing about sounded like solid work. That he hadn't fully understood what her firm did. Vivian looked at him. She thought about the Thanksgiving table, the fork being set down, the smile that wasn't a smile. She said, evenly and without unkindness, "No, you didn't." And then she went back to carrying dishes, because she had said exactly enough, and Gerald, for the first time in 4 years of knowing her, had absolutely nothing left to add. She and Marcus married the following year. Gerald gave a toast at the rehearsal dinner that was careful and brief and conspicuously avoided the word substance. In the wedding photos, he is smiling. In most of them, he is looking at his son. Vivian is looking at the camera, the way a person looks when they already know how this ends, and they're not worried about it anymore. Here's what stays with me about this one. Gerald said what he said out loud, at a table full of people, because he had spent a lifetime saying things like that and having them go unchallenged. Not because he was powerful. Because the people he said them to kept trying to change his mind. Kept softening themselves to fit his framework. Kept performing smallness in the hope that if they made themselves small enough, he'd eventually see something he approved of. Vivian never tried to change his mind. She just stopped being small. That's it. That's the whole move. She didn't confront him, didn't expose him, didn't wait for a perfect moment to deliver a speech. She just refused to let his opinion of her determine the size of the space she took up. And in doing that, in simply becoming fully, visibly herself, she made his assessment impossible to maintain. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do to someone who told you that you're nothing is to quietly, patiently, become undeniable. If this story hit close to home, I'd genuinely like to know. Drop a comment and tell me what you would have done in Vivian's position. And if you want more stories like this one, I've got a new one coming this week. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next story.